Hello, everyone. I am the Sleeper Man, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. Think sleep paralysis is terrifying? Try living in a haunted house that used to be a funeral home. In this video, I'll reveal the night I came face to face with the pale girl standing by my bed, and how it all connects to the home's chilling past. Stay until the end, or you'll miss the shocking twist that finally set me free. Or did it? I didn't expect much from that first night home. The house was always quiet, like it was holding its breath. Being back after so long felt strange, but I brushed it off as nostalgia. My family's house wasn't like other homes. It used to be a funeral home, over 100 years old, with creaky floors and walls that always seemed too thin. If you stood in the hallway at night, you could swear the house was alive with all the creaking and groaning. But this night, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just happy to be home from college for Christmas break. My room, just as ID left it, was a comfort. The bed, the soft rain sounds pattering against the windows, it all felt like a sleep aid, a perfect setup for a peaceful night, or so I thought. It was around midnight when I started to feel off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, but there was something different about the air in my room. The rain outside turned from a gentle rhythm to something sharper, more urgent. My dog, who usually slept curled at my feet, suddenly perked up. She let out a low growl, staring at the far corner of the room. I didn't think much of it. ID heard plenty of stories about dogs sensing things humans couldn't. But then her growling got louder. My heart raced a little, but I convinced myself it was nothing more than her reacting to shadows. You know how it goes. Old houses make you hear and see things that aren't there. Then it happened. Sleep paralysis. I've had it before, but this time was different. I woke up, or at least I thought I did, but I couldn't move. My eyes darted around the room, and that's when I saw her. The pale figure of a girl standing next to my bed, wearing a dark headband. She wasn't looking at me. She faced the window. The moonlight highlighted her sickly white skin, making her seem more like a ghost than anything human. My chest tightened as I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Every horror story I'd ever heard about sleep paralysis suddenly felt real, and I was trapped in it. The worst part was the silence. The rain sounds had faded into the background, replaced by an oppressive stillness. My dog, who'd been barking moments before, was now silent. She lay still, her body stiff, like she sensed the same thing I did. The girl, this thing, just stood there, motionless. I never saw her face, but it didn't matter. Her presence was enough to make every nerve in my body scream in terror. My mind raced, trying to figure out if this was all a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. It was too vivid, too real. True stories about haunted houses and sleep paralysis all rushed through my head, and I started to wonder if I was living one of those scary stories now. Minutes felt like hours. I tried to move, to do anything, but my body refused to listen. It wasn't until my dog let out another growl that the girl slowly faded. She didn't move or turn. She just disappeared, just like that. The air in the room shifted back to normal. My limbs jerked, finally responding to my commands, and I shot up in bed, gasping for breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and I looked around wildly, but there was no sign of her. The rain sounds returned, calm once more, but I wasn't fooled. Something had been there, and I wasn't sure if it would return. Sleep paralysis was common enough, right? I even Googled it the next morning to reassure myself that what I saw was just a hallucination, but deep down, I knew something was off. This house had always had a strange energy to it, and spending time here long enough, you'd start noticing the little things. Footsteps when no one was there, a door creaking open when it shouldn't. Things that, on a normal day, could be explained away. But after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that ID stepped into one of those true stories you hear about haunted places. It was a nagging thought that stayed with me as the days passed. My dog, however, wasn't so easily convinced. She hadn't been herself since that night, always on edge. She would wander around my room, sniffing the air and staring at that same corner with a low whine. It was starting to get to me. The air in the house felt heavier, like there was something lurking just out of sight, waiting. Even though it was the middle of the day, the rooms felt darker than they should. Shadows clung to the corners, and every creak or groan from the old house seemed louder than normal. I told my mom about the dog's strange behavior, but she just brushed it off, saying the house had always had its quirks. Then, a few days later, it happened again. It was late, and I was lying in bed trying to focus on the rain sounds outside to fall asleep. The gentle rhythm usually helped calm my mind, acting as a kind of sleep aid. But that night, the rain wasn't enough to drown out the growing unease I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about that girl, how she had stood so still, facing the window. No face, no expression, just there. I turned over in bed, pulling the blankets tighter around me, hoping for sleep, but sleep never came. Around 2 a.m., I woke up, my body rigid. I couldn't move again. My heart sank. I knew what was coming. Slowly, my eyes moved to the side, and there she was, the same girl, in the same position, standing by the window, her back to me. This time she felt closer, as if she'd shifted just a little toward my bed. My breath hitched in my throat, and all I could do was stare, paralyzed, as the scene played out like a bad rerun of a horror story. My dog was frozen too, this time barely making a sound, just the faintest whimper from her corner of the bed. I couldn't take it anymore. I mentally screamed at myself to move, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. The room felt suffocating, and the air was thick with something I couldn't describe. All I knew was that whatever this was, it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't going to stop. Forcing my eyes away from the figure, I focused on my breathing, willing my limbs to wake up. After what felt like an eternity, my fingers twitched. The moment I felt control returning, the figure by the window flickered just for a second, like a glitch in reality, and then she was gone. I bolted upright, gasping for breath. My dog jumped off the bed and started barking at the corner again, her hackles raised. It was all too real. The pale girl, the feeling of being trapped, the suffocating air. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing. This wasn't something I could brush off anymore. Whatever was haunting this house wasn't finished with me. I spent the next day on edge. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl, and how she seemed closer that second night. The house felt different now. It wasn't just my room that had an unsettling atmosphere. It was the whole place. Every hallway felt like it was closing in on me, and the creaks in the walls were sharper, more deliberate, like the house itself was shifting. My dog, always by my side, was acting worse than ever. She wouldn't sit still, pacing the room, sniffing the corners, and letting out these low, anxious whines. It was getting hard to ignore that something was seriously wrong. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own room. I knew how ridiculous it seemed. A grown adult too scared to sleep alone, but I couldn't help it. The thought of seeing her again, of waking up frozen while she stood by the window, was too much. I grabbed my pillow and crept into my mom's room like I used to when I was a kid. She didn't say anything when I slid under the covers next to her, though she gave me a look that said she understood. She'd lived in this house longer than I had. She knew it wasn't always just in my head. I slept better for a while, or at least I tried to convince myself I did. But it was impossible to shake the feeling that the girl wasn't done with me. The rain sounds outside, which I usually found soothing, now felt like background noise in some horror story I was living. Nights were worse, and even in my mom's bed I kept waking up in the early hours, heart pounding for no reason, listening for any sign of that girl. My dog stayed glued to my side, no longer barking but staring into the corners of the room with wide, alert eyes. I wasn't sure what she was seeing, but I trusted her instincts. If she was still on edge, then I had every reason to be. One night, while lying awake in the dark, I heard it. Not the rain, not the creaks of the house, but footsteps. They were faint, barely audible over the patter of rain, but unmistakable. I held my breath, listening. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me again, but then I heard them again, closer this time, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking down the hall toward my room. My dog perked up, her ears twitching as she stared at the door. Her low growl vibrated through the bed, and I felt my chest tighten. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. I froze, my heart thudding so hard I was sure it would wake my mom. But she stayed asleep, completely unaware of the terror gripping me. For a moment the house was dead silent, the only sound the rain gently tapping against the window. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I had imagined it, there came a soft knock on the door. Not a loud bang, but a slow, measured tap, as if whoever or whatever it was didn't want to disturb anyone but me. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Had the girl left the window and now stood outside the door? I couldn't bring myself to look, too afraid of what I might see. My dog's growl turned into a full-blown bark, breaking the silence and making me flinch. My mom stirred beside me, groaning in her sleep, but I stayed perfectly still, every muscle locked in fear. The knock didn't come again. Instead, the silence returned, thick and unnerving, leaving me to wonder what would happen if I dared to open the door. The next morning I was a wreck. I hadn't slept much after the knock, my mind running wild with possibilities. Had it been real, or was I spiraling into paranoia, seeing threats in every shadow? My dog hadn't calmed down either. She was restless, her eyes always darting to the corners of the room, as if waiting for something to appear. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. I decided to tell my mom everything. Up until now, I had kept quiet, too embarrassed to admit just how scared I was. But the knocking, the footsteps, and the girl, they weren't something I could handle alone anymore. So over breakfast, I finally spilled. I told her about the sleep paralysis, about the pale girl with the dark headband, and how she was always standing by the window. I told her about my dog's strange behavior, how she'd barked at nothing, and the footsteps I'd heard in the hallway. My mom listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she set down her coffee cup and sighed. "I've felt things in this house too," she admitted, her voice low, "but nothing like what you're describing. This house used to be a funeral home, remember? It's old, and it's seen a lot of things." She paused, as if debating whether to say more. "I don't think we're alone here, but whatever it is, it hasn't hurt us, right? It's just lingering." Her words weren't exactly comforting, but at least I wasn't crazy. The house had a history, and maybe some part of that history hadn't fully moved on. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl wanted something, and until I figured out what, I wouldn't find peace. That night, despite my fear, I decided to sleep in my room again. I couldn't keep running. Whatever was happening, I needed to face it. As night fell, I lay in bed, my dog curled up next to me, her body tense. The rain sounds outside started again, providing a steady rhythm as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. I told myself it would be fine, that the girl was just a part of my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew she'd be back. And sure enough, sometime after midnight, I woke up to that familiar, terrifying sensation. I was paralyzed again, my body frozen in place, but my mind was wide awake, screaming at me to move. I could already feel her presence before I saw her. Slowly, my eyes drifted to the window, and there she was. The same pale figure, the same dark headband, standing just a few feet away from my bed. But this time, something was different. She wasn't facing the window, she was facing me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at her, and for the first time, I saw her face. It was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just a pale, featureless surface staring back at me. The sight sent a jolt of terror through my body, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as she slowly raised a hand pointing toward the door. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. I gasped, sitting up in bed, my body finally free from its paralysis. My dog was barking frantically, her eyes fixed on the door. I scrambled out of bed, my heart still racing, and threw open the door, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty hallway stretching out before me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and in the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl had been trying to tell me something about the door, about whatever was behind it, but I never found out what. The haunting stopped after that night, and I never saw her again, but I could never forget her either. Every time I lay in bed, every time the rain started falling, I'd hear the faintest echo of her presence, and I'd wonder, what had she been trying to show me? And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still hear those footsteps. Are you struggling to explain the unexplainable in your home? Join me as I recount the strange occurrences we faced with Marvin, our friendly ghost who played tricks on us. If you've ever been terrified by unexplained sounds or flickering lights, this video is packed with insights that can help you navigate your fears. Stay tuned for an eye-opening revelation that might make you rethink what it means to share your space with the unknown. It was a joke at first, the idea of having a ghost. When my dad moved into the new house, he and my sister started calling it Marvin. But the more they talked about it, the less funny it became. I was away at college, getting sporadic texts from my sister late at night. The kind you get when someone's too scared to sleep. Marvin turned off the lights again, she'd say, and I'd roll my eyes trying to brush it off. But every message got under my skin. You see, Marvin wasn't your typical ghost, if such a thing exists. He wasn't slamming doors or whispering ominously in the dark. He was polite, in a way. If someone left the lights on, Marvin would helpfully turn them off. My dad would joke, "At least he's energy efficient." And they both laughed. It was their version of a bedtime story. A weirdly relaxing horror tale about a ghost with good manners. They never felt threatened, but there was something about it all that made me uneasy. I didn't think much about it until I came home for the summer. Sitting in the living room, I watched a movie with my dad and sister. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the hallway light flicker off. I was ready to blame a faulty circuit, but when I asked, my dad shrugged. "That's just Marvin," he said, not even looking away from the TV. A few minutes later, the bathroom light went off too, and this time I heard the distinct click of the switch being pressed down. It wasn't on a timer. You had to push it hard to turn it off. I didn't know what to make of it. By then, my sister had fully embraced the weirdness. She'd Skyped me from the house, telling me about Marvin's latest activities, and I'd listen, trying to convince myself it was just some electrical glitch. But every time, she insisted, "You can hear the switch click though. It's like someone's actually pushing it." I couldn't ignore that. Then came the day when Marvin became more than just a funny story. I was home alone one afternoon, standing in front of the mirror near the front door, pulling my hair into a ponytail. It was quiet, and I was only half paying attention to my surroundings when I heard a voice. "Clear as day," a man said. "Hello," right in my ear. My heart dropped into my stomach and I whipped around. No one, absolutely no one was there. I stood frozen for a second, still gripping my hair tie in mid-motion. The house was completely still. My brain raced to make sense of it. Maybe the TV was on, or the neighbor had called out from their yard, but I knew better. That voice was right behind me, like someone had leaned in to speak directly into my ear. My skin prickled, and I suddenly felt exposed, like I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't waste time debating it. I dropped the hair tie, grabbed my shoes and bolted out the door. The quiet neighborhood felt eerily calm as I started running down the street, my feet pounding against the pavement. My pulse matched the rhythm of my footsteps. But no matter how far I got from the house, that single word, "hello," played on a loop in my mind. It wasn't just the word itself, it was the familiarity, like whoever said it knew me. That made it worse somehow. When my dad came home for lunch later that day, I was already waiting outside. I told him what had happened, expecting him to brush it off, but his face grew serious. "Yeah, Marvin's gotten a bit more vocal lately," he said, as if this was something he'd been keeping from me. I stared at him, not sure if he was joking. "Vocal," I repeated, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. "Just little things," he said, "a word here or there. It's never happened to me, but your sister swears she heard him say her name once." Now the whole thing felt more like one of those scary stories you tell at sleepovers, the ones that make you jump at every creak in the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just home to some quirky light switch flipping ghost. Marvin was something more, something that knew we were there. And worse, maybe he wanted us to know he was there too. I tried to laugh it off later that evening, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When night fell, the rain started, tapping lightly on the windows, adding to the quiet tension in the house. My sister, trying to break the mood, played some rain sounds on her phone, calling it her sleep aid. But I could see it in her face. She wasn't relaxed. Neither was I. Every shadow seemed longer, every sound more pronounced. The rain was meant to be soothing, but it only made everything feel more claustrophobic, like the house was pressing in on us. As the rain poured down, I found myself sitting in the living room, surrounded by my dad and sister, our favorite movie flickering on the screen. I tried to focus on the plot, but the shadows danced in the corners of the room, and the sound of raindrops became a constant reminder that I was trapped in this house with Marvin. My heart raced whenever I heard a click the lights were behaving, but the tension in the air was palpable. Just as my sister settled in, the bathroom light flickered and then went out. I felt her stiffen beside me. "Marvin's at it again," she whispered, glancing nervously at the hallway. My dad chuckled softly, but I could tell his laughter was forced. "Nothing to worry about, as just making sure we don't waste electricity." But the nervous energy in the room was contagious. I felt like a tightly coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. Then, without warning, the hallway light flicked back on. It wasn't a gradual glow. It just blinked to life. My sister and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. There was something unsettling about the timing, like Marvin was aware of our apprehension and decided to taunt us. My sister tried to laugh it off, but I could hear the quiver in her voice. "I bet Hez watching the movie with us," she joked weakly, her eyes darting towards the darkened hallway. I couldn't help but join in on the forced laughter. We tried to focus on the film, but every flicker of light made our hearts race a little faster. I noticed that my dad's expression had shifted too. He was no longer laughing, just staring intently at the screen. Each time a light clicked off, a chill crept up my spine. It felt like Marvin was orchestrating the entire scene, controlling the lights like a conductor with an unseen symphony. After what felt like an eternity, the movie ended, and my sister grabbed her phone to check the time. It was after midnight and the house felt eerily quiet, even as the rain continued to fall. "Maybe we should call it a night," she suggested, glancing nervously at the dark hallway. I nodded, but deep down I wanted to stay awake, to keep watch over whatever it was that lurked in the shadows. "Let's just stay together for a bit," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We sat in silence, the sound of rain mixing with our nervous breaths, unsure of what the night might bring. With the rain still drumming against the roof, I could feel the weight of the silence wrapping around us, thicker than the darkness outside. My sister and I exchanged anxious glances, both aware that something was brewing just beyond the threshold of our understanding. It was one thing to laugh about Marvin during the day, but sitting in the dim light of the living room felt like an entirely different experience. I could almost feel his presence, a quiet observer lurking just beyond our vision. As the hours dragged on, the air grew heavier. My sister finally broke the silence. "Do you think hell ever leave?" she asked. I looked at her, uncertain of how to answer. Marvin was part of our family lore now, a ghostly figure we had come to accept, but deep down a part of me wondered what it meant for him to be so present. "Maybe he just likes having us around," I replied, trying to reassure her. But the thought felt hollow. What kind of ghost enjoys company? Just then, the living room light flickered off completely. My heart dropped. We were plunged into darkness, only the faint light from the hallway illuminating our worried faces. The sound of the rain seemed to amplify, drowning out my thoughts and leaving us in a fragile state of fear. "Marvin, can you turn it back on?" my sister called out, her voice a mixture of fear and defiance. It felt silly to plead with a ghost, but desperation made us vulnerable. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light snapped back on, flooding the room with brightness. We both jumped, hearts racing. "See? Hez just messing with us," I said, trying to lighten the mood. But the laughter faded quickly, swallowed by the eerie tension still clinging to the air. My sister shivered, and I could see the fear etched on her face. "Let's just go to bed. We can deal with him in the morning," she suggested. Standing up and moving towards the hallway, I followed her into the dark, half expecting Marvin to turn off the lights again. We made our way to the bedrooms, exchanging uneasy glances as we passed the bathroom and hallway. As I climbed into bed, I realized I'd miss Marvin, strange as that sounded. He was part of our Halloween horror stories now, a testament to the unexplained. But that night, I hoped it would be the last I'd ever see of him. My mind buzzed with unanswered questions. But eventually, exhaustion took over. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marvin was still watching over us, a silent guardian, even in the quiet chaos of the unknown. Have you ever felt the chill of a haunted place? In this video, we'll take you through terrifying true Halloween horror stories that reveal the secrets lurking in the shadows. If you've ever wondered what really happens in haunted schools and abandoned buildings, you won't want to miss this. Stay tuned to uncover the spine-chilling experiences that could change how you see the darkness around you. It was a typical October evening, the kind where the air has a chill that bites at your skin, and the smell of damp leaves fills your lungs. My friends and I had gathered at the old middle school, a place we'd all grown to know well, not just as students, but as unwitting participants in its haunted lore. The Morrow estate, where Charles Lindbergh once roamed, had transformed into our daily grind, yet the stories of Violet, Sharp, the ghost of a woman, wrongly accused, hung in the air like fog, thick and suffocating. The third floor was notorious among students. You could practically hear the whispers of those who dared to tread up there. My heart raced a little as we climbed the creaky staircase, the sound echoing in the stillness of the building. I could almost feel Violet's sorrow wrapping around me like a shroud, reminding us all of the fate she met in those very halls. "You can feel it," one of my friends said as we approached the door to the old maid's quarters. "It's like the air gets heavier." Everyone nodded. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact we had all experienced at one time or another. As we stepped onto the third floor, the lights flickered, casting strange shadows that danced on the walls. It was disorienting, but we pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and that adrenaline that comes with a hint of fear. "What if we find something?" one of us joked, attempting to lighten the mood. But deep down, we all knew we weren't ready for whatever this building had to reveal. The thought of seeing something or someone made my skin crawl. The moment we ventured down the narrow hallway, it felt like the walls were closing in. I could hear my friends' whispers, but it was like they were underwater, muffled and distant. Suddenly, I felt a wave of panic. It was as if I were drowning in the heavy air, struggling to catch my breath. I turned to say something, but the words got caught in my throat. "You okay?" a friend asked. Concern etched across their face. I nodded, but I could see the worry mirrored in their eyes. We were all feeling it, a collective unease that hung over us like a storm cloud. Just as we reached the old maid's quarters, we heard an unsettling, harmonious sound drifting down the hallway. A choir of children. There were no children here, just us and the memories of a haunting past. I felt a chill run down my spine as the sound swelled, filling the space with an eerie presence. We exchanged frightened glances, unsure whether to run or stay. My heart raced. I could feel the fear coursing through my veins like a cold rush. "Let's get out of here," I finally said, breaking the spell that held us captive. As we hurried back down the hallway, the laughter of children seemed to follow us, a reminder of the ghostly tales we had dismissed as mere folklore. The flickering lights danced around us as if the building itself were alive, pushing us away from the remnants of Violet's tragic story. Outside, the rain began to pour, the sounds merging into a comforting rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just fled. The night would linger in our minds, a true scary story we'd carry with us. The next day at school felt different. The halls were busier, the laughter of students mingling with the sound of footsteps echoing off the old walls. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted overnight. Violet's presence seemed to linger in the air, heavy like the rain-soaked clouds outside. I found myself glancing up at the third floor, half expecting to see a flicker of movement through the dusty windows. A shiver ran down my spine, reminding me of our harrowing adventure the night before. During lunch, I sat with my friends, all of us trying to piece together what had happened. "You think it was just our imaginations?" one of them asked, pushing their food around on their plate. "No way," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "That choir, it felt too real." Everyone nodded, sharing a collective sense of dread. The stories of the Morrow estate had taken a new life in our minds, and we were no longer just kids hearing tales, we had lived one. After lunch, I decided to venture into the library, seeking a distraction from the whispers that haunted me. Surrounded by rows of dusty books, I found a tome about the history of our school. The pages chronicled Violet's tragic life, but I couldn't find the strength to read more than a few lines. Her story was filled with heartbreak and betrayal, and it was too much to bear. I could feel the weight of her unresolved pain pressing down on me, a reminder of the darkness that loomed just beyond the edges of our reality. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a storm rolled in, thunder rumbled, and the wind howled, sending rain lashing against the windows. The atmosphere shifted, and I felt that familiar suffocation return. The third floor was now a forbidden zone, an area we all avoided, but curiosity gnawed at me. I gathered my courage, texting my friends, "Let's go back tonight." The replies came back fast, a mix of hesitations and bravado, but we all knew we'd go. There was something inexplicable drawing us back to the old maids' quarters. As night fell, we regrouped outside the school, the rain subsiding to a soft drizzle. Our laughter felt forced, but we pushed through, each of us trying to maintain a facade of bravery. "This time we'll stick together," one of my friends said, but the uncertainty in their voice was palpable. We climbed the stairs again, each step creaking ominously beneath our feet. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation and fear. With each flickering light, I felt the shadows stretching around us, enveloping us in a darkness that felt alive. As we reached the third floor, the familiar heaviness of the air settled around us, thicker than before. The hallway stretched out, dimly lit, and filled with the scent of old wood and dust. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Let's just check the maids' quarters and get out," I suggested, trying to maintain a brave front. The others exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of excitement and trepidation. With a deep breath, we started down the corridor, the shadows stretching around us like fingers. Once we arrived at the old maids' quarters, I felt a chill race down my spine. The door creaked open with a hesitant push, revealing a room frozen in time. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the faint light filtering through grimy windows. We stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under our weight. "It's just a room," one of my friends whispered. The words felt empty, swallowed by the room's history. I could almost hear Violet's sigh, a sound steeped in sadness and longing. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely, plunging us into darkness. I could hear my friends gasp, their breaths quickening. "What now?" someone muttered. Panic threatened to take hold, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Just stay close," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The darkness was suffocating, and I felt as if I were being pulled deeper into the weight of the room, each second stretching into eternity. Then we heard a faint echo of laughter, as if a group of children was playing in the distance. It sent chills down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but no one replied. The laughter grew louder, reverberating off the walls, and the air thickened with a palpable tension. "This isn't funny anymore," another friend said, their voice shaky. "Let's get out of here." But just as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. I stumbled back, heart racing, as fear washed over me. "What is happening?" I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the laughter, now turned into a haunting melody. It felt like the walls were closing in, and we were trapped in Violet's world, surrounded by echoes of the past. Just when it seemed we would be consumed by the darkness, a flicker of light returned, illuminating the room for a brief moment. I caught a glimpse of something in outline, a figure standing in the corner. The room felt alive, pulsing with energy, and the weight of Violet's sorrow pressed heavily on my chest. Desperate for escape, I rushed to the door, my friends scrambling behind me. With all my strength, I threw my weight against it, and after a few heart-stopping moments, it swung open. We burst into the hallway, gasping for breath, the laughter still ringing in our ears. As we fled down the stairs, the rain outside intensified, a cacophony of noise that matched the chaos within us. We spilled into the night, feeling the cool air against our skin, grateful to be free, but the shadows lingered, taunting us with their memories. Once we were outside, the rain hit us like a cold slap, washing away the residual fear that clung to our skin. I couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind, the way it seemed to pulse with Violet's unresolved anguish. My friends huddled together, their faces pale and wide-eyed. "What just happened?" one of them stammered, and we all stood in stunned silence, the echoes of our experience replaying in our heads like a haunting melody. "I don't know, but we need to leave," I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. The thrill of the adventure had quickly turned into something much darker. As we moved away from the school, the rain became a constant rhythm, drowning out our voices. We walked in silence, our hearts still racing, each step taking us further away from the old maid's quarters and deeper into our own thoughts. Just as we reached the edge of the school grounds, I felt a sudden pull, a longing to look back. I turned to face the building, its silhouette stark against the stormy sky. The lights flickered again, a brief reminder of the tension we had just escaped. In that moment, I could almost hear the soft whisper of Violet's story, calling to me from the shadows. What if she's still there? I thought, a chill running through me. Was she trapped in that place, a prisoner of her own sorrow? I shared my thoughts with my friends, and their expressions reflected a mix of fear and sympathy. "We shouldn't have gone up there," one of them murmured, glancing nervously over their shoulder. "What if we didn't help her? What if she just wanted to be heard?" The thought weighed heavily on us, the burden of the past crashing into our present. We had crossed a line, delving into something that had always been whispered about, but never confronted. As we walked home, I realized that the experience had changed us. We were no longer just students at a haunted school. We had become part of its legacy, intertwined with the memories of those who had come before us. The rain slowed, and I could hear the soft sound of my friend's footsteps beside me. Though we had escaped the darkness of the maid's quarters, I knew the true weight of Violet's story would linger with us. And as I lay in bed that night, the echoes of laughter mixed with rain sounds filled my mind, a reminder that some stories, no matter how frightening, are never really finished. Though we had left the haunted halls behind, a part of us remained forever linked to Violet. Her story had seeped into our lives, leaving behind a shadow that would always dance at the edges of our consciousness. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real horror stories, true stories, lay not just in what we experienced that night, but in the understanding that some pasts are too painful to let go. Have you ever experienced something so chilling that it changes the way you see the world? In this video, we dive into a haunting true story where siblings face a ghostly figure that blurs the line between reality and nightmare. If you think you can handle the spine-tingling details of their terrifying night, stay tuned. You won't believe what they uncovered when dawn finally broke. Don't miss the shocking twists that will keep you questioning what lurks in the dark. I remember those summer weekends at my cousin's house like they were yesterday. The rural isolation wrapped around the farmhouse, the sprawling fields stretching out in every direction, offering both freedom and eeriness. On one particularly sweltering night, the kind where the air felt thick and heavy, my two siblings and I found ourselves crammed into my older cousin's room. There was no air conditioning, just the dull hum of cicadas outside. As we tossed and turned, trying to escape the heat, as the hours crawled by, sleep was elusive. So I decided to venture out into the living room, where I recalled my aunt had opened the windows to let in a breeze. Once I settled on the couch, I drifted off into a restless slumber, lulled by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But the peace was short-lived. I woke abruptly, heart racing, a prickly sensation crawling up my spine. It felt like someone was watching me, a tangible weight pressing down on my chest. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse, and the air turned electric. I hesitated to open my eyes, dreading what I might see. Eventually, curiosity won over fear, and I slowly blinked them open. My gaze locked onto the figure sitting across from me, a little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, dressed in a frilly gown that looked like something straight out of the 1890s. Her long, wavy hair framed her pale, translucent face, glinting with a golden hue from the streetlight pouring in through the glass door. She was brushing her hair, the action so serene it felt like a scene from a painting. Yet something about it sent chills racing down my spine. The moment felt surreal, as if I had slipped into a horror story, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't there just to keep me company. Then, in an instant, she paused, placing the brush delicately in her lap. With a warm smile, she waved gently and mouthed the word, Hello. It was a simple gesture, but terror gripped me like a vice. I couldn't process what was happening. I shut my eyes tightly, praying that when I opened them again, she would be gone. In a panic, I shot up from the couch and sprinted back to my cousin's room, my heart pounding in my ears. As I crawled back into bed, I convinced myself it had to be a dream. After all, how could a little girl just appear in the middle of the night? But sleep didn't come easy after that. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, the whispers of the night growing louder, drowning out the cicadas. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to will the images of her away, but the fear lingered like a shadow. When morning finally broke, I was the last one to wake. As I shuffled into the kitchen, the smell of pancakes filled the air, mingling with the sunlight streaming through the windows. Everyone was gathered around the table, laughing, but I couldn't shake the dread of the night before. As I poured a cup of juice, my older brother's voice broke through my thoughts. He was mid-story, recounting his own midnight experience. I froze, the blood draining from my face as he described how he too felt a presence, and had seen the very same little girl. The tension in the kitchen thickened as my brother recounted his night. Each word he spoke was a punch to my gut. I felt as if I were drowning in a pool of disbelief and fear. I woke up, he said, his voice low, and it was like I could feel someone else there. I thought it was you. He glanced at me, confusion written across his face, but when I looked, it was her, the girl. I ran back to our room faster than I've ever moved. A mix of laughter and disbelief surrounded us, as the rest of the family brushed off his tale as a product of an overactive imagination. Yet, I knew better. The chill from the night before crept back into my bones. I exchanged glances with my brother, both of us silently agreeing that our experiences were far from made-up bedtime stories. I could hardly focus on breakfast. The pancakes tasted like cardboard as I replayed the events in my mind. The girl's golden hue, her eerie calmness, and that chilling smile. After breakfast, we decided to head outside. The sun was bright, and the heat began to creep back in, but we had no intentions of returning to the living room anytime soon. The fields beckoned, and we ran out to play, kicking up dust and laughter as we tried to shake off the shadows of the night. But even in the sun, the memory of the little girl lingered in the back of my mind. It was a true story that none of us could escape. I half expected to see her among the corn stalks, her ghostly form dancing between the rows. As the day dragged on, the fear slowly faded, replaced by the thrill of summer adventures. But as dusk approached, the air shifted. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that twisted and danced like phantoms across the land. I could feel the tension building again, a palpable presence creeping back into our midst. It was like we were being drawn back to that moment in the living room, as if the night was calling us back. Night fell quickly, and with it came the familiar sense of unease. We had gathered for a family movie night, but the laughter felt strained, almost forced. As the credits rolled, the air thickened with an unspoken agreement. No one wanted to be alone. My older cousin suggested we all sleep in the living room, creating a barrier of bodies between us and whatever might be lurking in the shadows. I agreed, hoping that the presence of others would keep the little girl at bay. Settling onto the couch, the old fabric felt warm but comforting. As I nestled in with my siblings, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The sound of rain began tapping against the windows, a soothing rhythm that mixed with the rising tension in the room. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the storm was brewing not just outside, but within our very souls. I closed my eyes, praying that the night would pass uneventfully. But deep down, I knew the whispers of the past had not yet been silenced. The rain continued to patter softly against the window, a soothing sound that contrasted sharply with the unease building in the room. I drifted in and out of sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the little girl. Each time I opened my eyes, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow, shifting in the dim light. I tried to convince myself it was just the rain and the wind, but deep down, I felt something else lurking just beyond the threshold of my awareness. Around midnight, a low rumble of thunder rolled through the night. I jolted awake, heart pounding, only to find my little sister curled against me, her soft breaths breaking the silence. The sound of rain intensified, drowning out all other noise, and for a brief moment I felt safe. But then, just as I began to relax, I heard its soft whispers echoing through the living room, like distant children's laughter. It was so faint at first, I thought I might be imagining it, but as it grew clearer, a shiver ran down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, nudging my brother awake. He blinked at me, confusion etched on his face, and then his expression shifted to one of alarm. "What?" he asked, voice hushed, clearly on edge. I listened again, and the whispers morphed into something distinct, like a chant, a melody from long ago. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was the same voice I had heard in my dreams, soft and melodic but filled with a sense of foreboding. I couldn't shake the feeling that the little girl was back, and that she was trying to communicate. My heart raced as I looked around the room, half expecting to see her sitting in the corner, her golden glow reflecting in the low light. My brother, sensing my fear, shot up, wide-eyed. "It's just the rain, right?" he said, but his voice trembled as if he wasn't convinced. I shook my head, staring into the darkness, trying to pinpoint the source of the whispers. Just then the lights flickered, plunging us into darkness before they steadied again. The faint glow of the streetlight outside seeped in, illuminating the corners of the room in a sickly yellow hue. In that moment, the whispers grew louder, morphing into the laughter of children, echoing in a haunting melody. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, just the persistent tapping of the rain and the incessant echoes in my mind. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Then, without warning, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the air had thickened around us. I exchanged a glance with my brother, fear etched on both our faces. "What just happened?" he muttered. I didn't have an answer. The only thing I could think was that the little girl was still with us, and whatever she wanted, we weren't ready to face it. The night had only just begun, and the real horror was just lurking around the corner, waiting for us to acknowledge it. Morning arrived, but it brought little comfort. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, illuminating the room, I could still feel the remnants of fear lingering in the corners. My little sister stirred beside me, rubbing her eyes as if waking from a deep slumber, completely unaware of the chilling events of the night. I, on the other hand, felt as though I had been on a dark journey, one that left me unsettled and anxious. I tiptoed into the kitchen, desperate to find some sense of normalcy. My cousins and siblings were gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories about the previous day. But the laughter felt distant to me, as if I were still caught in that eerie twilight, battling shadows. As I poured myself a glass of orange juice, I caught snippets of conversation about the upcoming Halloween, completely unaware of what that night would hold for us. "Did you guys hear that weird sound last night?" one of my cousins asked, their voice slicing through the light-hearted chatter. My stomach twisted at the mention of the whispers. I turned, trying to gauge their reactions. They shrugged it off, attributing it to the wind or the old house settling. "It's just the rain sounds messing with our heads," another cousin chuckled, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had transpired. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths. As I finished my juice, my brother entered the kitchen, his face pale. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, drawing the attention of everyone present. I followed him outside, the sun shining brightly now, but it did little to dispel the memories of the night. "I saw her again," he confessed, his eyes darting nervously. "I thought I was dreaming, but she was real." The weight of his words hung in the air, drawing my gaze away from the cheerful scene before us and back to the shadows that lingered in my mind. "What do we do?" I asked, my heart racing. He shrugged, clearly grappling with his own fear. "Maybe we need to leave the house, go for a walk or something." Just then we heard a distant laugh, the kind that echoes in the quiet moments when the world feels still. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the same melodic laughter from the night before, sending chills down my spine. In that moment, I realized we couldn't outrun what had happened. We were bound to confront the memories and face the unknown that had seeped into our lives, forever altering our perception of innocence. The real horror was that we had glimpsed a truth that was too unsettling to ignore. What if your childhood home held terrifying secrets that could come back to haunt you? In this video, we dive into a true horror story from a family living in a century-old house in rural Wisconsin, where unsettling encounters with the unknown left them questioning their sanity. If you've ever felt a chill in the air or sensed something lurking in the shadows, this tale could reveal why some places never forget their past. Stick around to discover the shocking truth that could change the way you view your own memories. Growing up in an old house can feel like living inside a living museum, where every creak and groan carries a story of its own. Our home in rural Wisconsin was over a century old when we moved in, its history etched into the very walls. It was a rambling structure, expanded over the years, with a renovated attic that seemed to harbor more than just dust. I spent countless hours wandering its hallways, often finding myself lost in thoughts about the stories those walls could tell if only they could speak. As a child, I shared this space with my brother. He was my partner in all things, especially when it came to exploring the nooks and crannies of our home. We frequently brushed off the strange occurrences we experienced as figments of our imagination. But even as kids, some moments were impossible to ignore. One evening, Dylan dashed upstairs to grab something for our mom. He returned, wide-eyed, claiming he'd seen a little boy standing in the doorway of our shared room. I remember laughing it off, thinking he'd just gotten carried away with a spooky story. But deep down, I felt a shiver run down my spine. My experiences were less about visions and more about feelings. I distinctly remember the way my Barbies seemed to shift on the dollhouse, as if they had their own agenda. It happened at night, after everyone else had gone to bed. The moonlight would cast shadows that danced across the room, and I'd swear I could see the plastic figures rearranging themselves. I'd try to tell Dylan, but he'd roll his eyes and tell me I was being silly. Kids have a knack for dismissing the unsettling, don't they? Things took a more serious turn one night when a family friend crashed on our couch. My mom had invited her over for a girls' night, and I stayed up late listening to them laugh. Around 2 a.m, everything changed. The friend screamed, jolting awake, claiming someone had been choking her. "There's something here, and I need to leave," she cried before rushing out the door, leaving us in stunned silence. The laughter died, and an uneasy tension replaced it. I felt it crawl under my skin, and I was left wondering what really lurked in the shadows of our home. Years later, we had to dig up the septic tank, an ordeal that unveiled more than just old pipes. My parents contacted the original owner's son for help. When my mom, a bit too curious, asked if the place was haunted, I will never forget the look on his face. His skin drained of color, and he muttered something about his brother, who had hung himself in our living room as a teenager. I sat there, feeling the weight of the revelation, realizing the house held more than just memories. It held a darkness intertwined with our family's history. The stories that had haunted my childhood now echoed in my mind like rain sounds on a restless night, leaving me with a feeling of dread and unease that would never truly leave. As the years passed, the house became a patchwork of memories, some fond and others unsettling. I often thought about the boy Dylan saw, and I would catch glimpses of shadows in the corners of my eye, especially in that creepy attic space. It wasn't just my imagination. It felt like something was there, watching us, observing our lives. Whenever I spent time alone in the house, the silence would become deafening. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, whispering secrets just out of reach. One particularly rainy night, I found myself alone. The thunder outside rumbled like a freight train, and I sought refuge in my room, hoping the storm would drown out the uneasy feelings that often crept in during the evening. I buried myself in a book, trying to immerse myself in another world. But each time a gust of wind rattled the windows, I'd look up, heart racing, half expecting to see the little boy Dylan described standing there, grinning mischievously. The rain continued to pour, a steady rhythm that usually helped me relax. But not this time. I started hearing soft noises, faint enough to be dismissed as the wind or the house settling. But they grew louder, almost like whispers. "Help me," the words were unmistakable, pulling me out of my reading. I sat up, frozen, my pulse quickening. Had I finally lost it? Was I really hearing voices? Or was it just the wind playing tricks on me? I decided to investigate, my curiosity outweighing my fear. As I crept down the hallway, I felt the chill in the air intensify. Each step felt heavier, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The old wooden staircase groaned as I descended, and I could see shadows shifting in the flickering light of the hallway. The sounds guided me to the attic door. Heart pounding. I hesitated. I'd been up there countless times, but tonight felt different. The energy in the house was thick, almost electric. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The darkness enveloped me, and I reached for the light switch. As the bulb flickered to life, I was hit by a wave of dread. The room was empty, save for dust and cobwebs. But then I saw it, a small, tattered stuffed animal sitting in the corner. One I knew I hadn't placed there. It was one of my old toys, a remnant from childhood. I thought I had long lost. I approached it cautiously, every nerve ending screaming at me to turn back. Just as I bent down to pick it up, the whispers returned, louder this time, wrapping around me like a fog. Help me in that moment. I realized the house was not just a building. It was a keeper of memories and secrets. Whatever was there felt tied to me, to my childhood fears and my family's history. I could no longer ignore it. The little boy, the choking incident, and now these whispers, they all tied together. A narrative of horror that had haunted me since my childhood. But I was no longer the scared child hiding under blankets. I was an adult ready to confront the reality of my past, and I would find a way to understand what this all meant. That night, the rain continued to pour, but the sound no longer felt soothing. It was a relentless percussion against the windows, a backdrop to the turmoil inside my mind. I placed the stuffed animal back in the corner and stepped out of the attic, shutting the door behind me. There was no going back now. The whispers had ignited a spark of determination in me. I needed to uncover the truth about our home, the boy in the doorway, and the eerie feeling that had plagued us for years. As I made my way downstairs, I remembered my mother's conversation with the old man who had helped find the septic tank. I could still picture her face when she asked him about the haunting. It was a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, and his reaction was something I couldn't shake. It was as if she had uncovered a buried treasure of pain hidden beneath the surface of our lives. What if this house is connected to the boy? I pondered, a mix of dread and intrigue filling my thoughts. The next morning I decided to revisit that conversation with my mother. I wanted to ask her more about the old man's brother, to learn what he had known. Over breakfast I casually brought up the topic, my hands shaking slightly as I sipped my coffee. "Mom, do you remember what the old man told you about the house?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. She looked up from her plate, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. "Why are you asking about that now?" she replied. I had some strange experiences last night. You know, the whispers and everything. I thought it might be related to what he said." Her gaze softened as she began recounting the tale once more. His brother was a troubled kid. They didn't talk much about him, but I remember my parents saying he had a dark side. It was a tragedy, really. The more she spoke, the more my skin prickled. It felt like a puzzle slowly coming together, pieces of a story that had haunted us all these years. With every detail she shared, I felt a connection to that boy, the one Dylan saw, and the one whose presence still lingered in our home. Was he trapped here, unable to move on? I couldn't shake the feeling that our family was intertwined with his story, just as our lives had become entwined with this old house. "Mom, what do you think he wanted?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, her eyes distant. "Maybe he just wanted to be seen." That phrase echoed in my mind long after breakfast. If he wanted to be seen, perhaps it was time to confront the shadows that had woven themselves into the fabric of our family history. I resolved to return to the attic that night, not to run from the whispers, but to listen, to understand. I was ready to face whatever it was that had haunted us for so long. That evening, as darkness settled over the house, I prepared myself for what lay ahead. The rain had finally stopped, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. With every creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet, I felt an electric charge of anticipation mixed with dread. I climbed back up to the attic, clutching a flashlight, my heart racing with each step. I was ready to confront the shadows that had lingered in the corners of my mind for so long. When I reached the attic door, I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The atmosphere inside was thick and heavy, As if time itself had paused, holding its breath for my arrival, I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like stepping into a different world, one that was haunted by the memories of those who had come before me. As I scanned the room, I felt a chill wash over me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow flit past the corner of my eye. I directed the beam of light toward the dollhouse, the very object that had stirred my memories of those haunting nights. I stepped closer, the flashlight revealing more than just the toys. It revealed a connection to my childhood, to the boy Dylan had seen, and to the boy who had never truly left. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Suddenly, I felt a shift in the air, an unexplainable energy that surrounded me. The temperature dropped, and I could almost hear the soft, mournful whispers calling out to me. It was as if the very walls of the attic were alive with stories waiting to be told. I closed my eyes, willing myself to listen. I thought of my mother's words. Maybe he just wanted to be seen. I felt an urge to acknowledge the presence in the room, to give voice to the boy who had lingered in the shadows for so long. "Your story matters," I said, my voice steadying. "You're not alone anymore." In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. I opened my eyes to see a faint outline in the corner of the attic, the shape of a young boy, barely visible but undeniably there. My heart raced, but I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "I see you," I whispered again, feeling a connection deeper than I had ever known. The boy's figure seemed to brighten, the shadows lifting slightly, as if he was finally being acknowledged. As the clock ticked, the air began to clear, and I realized the boy was not just a specter of sorrow. He was a part of our family's story. I sensed he had found peace, that our acknowledgement had freed him from the chains of the past. With tears in my eyes, I whispered, "Thank you for sharing your story with me." In that moment, the whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence, the kind that fills you with a sense of belonging. The boy's presence lingered for just a heartbeat longer before fading into the night, leaving behind a feeling of warmth and understanding. As I descended from the attic, the air felt lighter. I knew our family's history would always be intertwined with that of the boy, but I felt a newfound sense of closure. The strange happenings, the whispers, and the ghostly figure would forever be part of our home's narrative, one filled with both joy and sorrow. I smiled softly as I entered the living room, feeling more at peace than I had in years, ready to embrace the true stories that had shaped my childhood. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.